So the International Monetary Fund says that the world is going to experience a worst recession that we've ever had since the 1930s. Worst, 4 times worse, at least in the Great Recession of 2008, says Goldman Sachs. So the 2008 panic, right, the 2020 Great Lockdown panic, the causes of the 1929 Great Depression, it's all supply and demand. It's all basic economics. You know, there's some medium of exchange. There's money. It's all, you know, kind of the same shit we can learn from history. Those who don't learn it are doomed to repeat it. So, the Great Depression, which is actually the second Great Depression, but 1929 and 1941, what caused it, started the trigger, the thing that triggered the stock market crash was the unaddressed August 1929 recession. So it was an unaddressed recession. 2 months prior to the stock market crash, there's income inequality, there's segregation, there's an artificial boom, created an artificial bust. Woodrow Wilson's 1913 Federal Reserve System was supposed to stop it, but everything they did fucked it up even more. They had a monetary contraction policy, including raising federal funds rate during the recession of August 1929. The money multiplier effect of the fractional reserve system of the Federal Reserve System, created the overuse of credit, the overuse of installment loans. They had a low discount rate. There was automation, disruption of production, the Dawes Act, giving loans to post-war Germany, but they're bankrupt. So with the unregulated banking practices, monopolistic pricing, the gold standard hurt the U.S. dollar. Overproduction of toasters, washing machines, refrigerators, cars, furniture, and also Herbert Hoover is an inept, incompetent douchebag. So, yeah, Herbert Hoover's like a Herbert, Hubert Humphrey. Herbert Hoover, Hoovervilles, Herbert Hoover, fucking Herbert Hoover. You don't even like saying the guy's name. President Herbert Hoover, what was 1928 America thinking, or whenever he was elected. So we've had a shit ton of panics, right? And panic is a recession and a depression. Yeah, I'm getting, panic. I think it's like shock, shell shock. Shell shock hits you, right? When someone says, "Oh, I'm inflicted with shell shock" versus PTSD. PTSD sounds like a walk in the park. It sounds like a nice, afternoon at the beach. PTSD, that ain't nothing, right? What, post-traumatic stress disorder? That's all. That ain't nothing. Shell shock, oh shit. So how come we had, panics all the fucking time in the in the 1700s, and now we don't have any more panics, but we have recessions, and we had a depression way back, then it was 12 years. That's, a great depression. That's not just that's a, fucking, recession is just a short-term downturn in the economy, and a depression is long-term. So what's the short-term? Recession can only last for 1 to 2 years. Any more than 2 years, that's a depression. That is a depression. So yeah, the IMF says that we're headed for basically a Great Depression. So we can learn from the Great Depression. We can also learn from the Panic of 1837, okay? Andrew Jackson, even though Andrew Jackson is a piece of shit. So first I want to talk about, let's see, how many panics have there been? There's a panic of 1792, 1797, 1807, 1815, to 1821, that's depression. 1837, 1843, that's 6-year recession. That's a depression. 1857 panic. 1873 to 1879, that's the Long Depression, also called the Great Depression at the time by Americans. So that's the first Great Depression. 1893 is another panic of 1896, 1907 panic, 1910 panic. We just stop, we just go through a recession and depressions without panicking. 1907 panic, 1910 and 1911 panic, 1920 and 1921 depression. Why is that a depression? That was only 2 years. 1929 to 1941, Great Depression, right? The second one, 1973 to 1975, recession. 2 years, barely, recession. 1980 recession, 2008 recession, and now the 2020 recession. So, yeah, the 1814 took a little trip down with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We had a little bacon and we had a little beans. And we did something New Orleans. They fired our guns and the British kept it coming. It wasn't many as it was a while ago. Fired once more and the British kept it coming. It wasn't many as the Gulf of Mexico. So the discount rate, it's the minimum interest rate set by the Federal Reserve for lending to other banks, a rate used for discounting bills of exchange. So it's the minimum interest rate set by the Federal Reserve, the central bank, a private institution, private corporation, bankers bank, all by and for the banks, not for the American people, just for the 125, the presidents, board of directors, and board of governors of the people, of the leaders of the Federal Reserve System for lending to other banks. A rate used for discounting bills of exchange. After the 1832 election, so you got Andrew Jackson, right? Fucking genocidal and, slave trading, low-life piece of shit. But he shut down the bank, and the bank was corrupt as fuck. And we're going to find out, all about Nick Biddle. So Andrew Jackson, when he was trying to shut the bank down, he was like, oh, I don't know, maybe I could be wrong. Maybe we need a bank, maybe we should start a brand new one. Maybe I should recharter this thing. Maybe I'm, I don't know. I'll do this experiment. Let's see what happens. Let's get rid of this goddamn fucking bank. So 1832, that was all about the goddamn bank. The whole election, then the, nullification crisis. South Carolina's being a bunch of assholes. Just like they are today, right? 1832 election, October 7th, 1833, Nicholas Biddle is the president of the United States Bank, is going to hold a meeting with the bank's board members in Philadelphia. There he's going to announce to the bank that he's going to raise interest rates in the coming months in order to stockpile the bank's monetary reserves. Raising interest rates, going to save himself and the bank money, but not lending to people. He's also going to call in the loans, not, giving out loans, not lending money, but saying, give us our money back or give us your land. Biddle reduced discounts, which the discount rate, I'm not for sure, 1832, but this 1833. And he also demanded that state banks honor their liabilities that they owe to the Bank of the United States. And a lot of these banks are going to declare bankruptcy in 4 short years in the Panic of 1837. So Nicholas Biddle is going to induce a recession, depression, panic on purpose in 1833, and it worked at the time, until people found out what he did. But raising the interest rate, calling in the loans, demanding the state banks, reducing all these things is to say, tighten up your bootstraps, tighten your belts, America, and you need to start, paying the money that you owe. So he deliberately instigated a financial crisis, a small, short recession, believing that it would force the nation, the president, Congress, that the central bank was needed and necessary and essential. See, you guys need me, or else what? Or else you're going to get the recession, depression again, the panic, the ties of party allegiance. This is Nicholas Biddle. He says, he wrote a letter saying the ties of party allegiance can only be broken by the actual conviction of distress in the community. Nothing but the evidence of suffering abroad will produce any effect in Congress. Nothing but the evidence of suffering abroad. We need an actual conviction of distress in the community. I have no doubt that such a course will ultimately lead to the restoration of the currency and the recharter of the bank. So Nicholas Biddle fucked the American economy up on purpose. And therefore, Andrew Jackson, the racist piece of shit, Indian genociding, slave trading, low-life, U.S. boy soldier killer that he is right to shut down the second bank of the United States. 100% right. There's no doubt about it. So when it comes to the Panic of 1837, how come, the end of the charter of the bank, it's a 20-year charter, started 1816, and it's going to end in 1836. Andrew Jackson is going to pull out the U.S. funds out of the U.S. bank before the end of the charter, like a couple years prior to doing so, because he said that, shutting the bank down, killing the bank is in the best interest of the American people, which he was right, because, Nicholas Biddle tried to crash the economy intentionally to scare everybody into submission, but with that kind of power, the 1% financiers, they could just fuck up the entire economy. Like, hey, you're going to get the, you're going to get the, whatever. There's some meme about, the lambs, anyways. They blame the president, thinking nobody, would notice what he did. So Nicholas Biddle crashed the economy. It was, Andrew Jackson's fault. So when people say that today, it's almost kind of worked, right? So Andrew Jackson shut down the bank, and look what happened the next year after Andrew Jackson's out of office. It's going to happen, the Panic of 1837 is under Martin Van Buren's watch. But they're going to blame Andrew Jackson shutting the, Bank of the United States down. It was his fault. I think it's very surface. You don't know enough if that's, the conclusion that you've come up with. So, Andrew Jackson, he'd already, pulled out the funds. So basically, the Second Bank of the United States was over before 1836. It was a private bank, and it would only last 5 more years past 1836 on its own merits. The Second Bank of the United States is going to dissolve in 1841, and we're not going to have a central bank until 1913 with the Federal Reserve System. The independent treasury is the system we're going to have under Martin Van Buren, and that's going to be carried mostly on, in between the time 60, 70, 80 years between the Second Bank of America and the Third Bank of America, the Federal Reserve System. So, yeah, Andrew Jackson could have been wrong. He could have been wrong shutting the bank down. Maybe you need, the bank for what? Reliable currency? I'll address that in a second. But, he's like, shit, he even considered it like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should just recharter this thing, which just shows you, that people kind of dig their heels with one side, even though they kind of see the pros and cons of, each and every side. So Nick Biddle collapsed the economy on purpose, and that proves Andrew Jackson correct. Now, it was the Second Bank of America providing reliable currency. Again, I find this hard to believe, too. So you had the Continental. That's the first U.S. dollar. It's dead and gone by 1790, right? It's not worth a Continental because they're absolutely worthless. But that's how you finance the revolution, really. And Continentals are probably, worth something today. So, shit, you probably should have held on to the Continental in the long term, right? Now, that probably contributed to the Panic of 1792, which Alexander Hamilton said, solved beautifully. The U.S. won't try paper currency until Abraham Lincoln in 1861, and then the current U.S. greenback jack, the Federal Reserve notes, they're produced in 1914, the year after, the 1913 Federal Reserve was instituted. So he's going to intentionally collapse the economy, right, to show America who's boss, and that proves Andrew Jackson correct. Now, was the bank actually doing some service that was good for America, such as giving us a reliable, currency? Well, I don't think they even had a dollar. They don't even have, like, a demand note, I think is what they call them, a demand note, or literally, it's not money. Federal Reserve note's a bank note, and so that's what they were using back then, but it was bank notes that was supposed to be backed by silver and gold, because that was the standard. Silver and gold standard, I think there was a 16-to-1 Currency Act or Coinage Act or some shit that was passed. So the Fed, just created all these, greenback jacks, the banker's bank created by and of and for the bankers. The currency at that time would have been a banknote, right? And it would have been like a silver and gold certificate. So it would be actually a stronger currency than today. So, yeah, I guess in a way it would have been a stable currency because it's backed by silver and gold. That's strong, sound, hard money. Therefore, banknotes would have had to have been backed by silver and gold back then. So, today it's fiat, right? We got fiat, free floating Federal Reserve bank notes with no backing whatsoever. And today's dollar has some relationship with gold and silver, but it's not pegged to silver and gold or land or anything at all. The U.S. dollar is worth just the print, the paper and ink that it's printed on. So, paper money in Andrew Jackson's day, this is silver and gold certificates. if, it was somehow fairly, they printed up equally, it's possible that the Second Bank of America, just in general, Bank of America is probably a good idea, right? If it's run properly and it's for the best interest of the American people. Yeah, I mean, America needs to get their finances together and shit, but you do need to separate it. In fact, you should have, anytime they try to dip into the Treasury, it should go to the vote of the people, not a voice vote, in an empty chamber. The Republic is going to die by unanimous consent in an empty chamber. So, where are we at now? So the argument of them, providing a stable currency, perhaps, maybe. And there wasn't a very good alternative that Andrew Jackson had provided. Andrew Jackson's alternative was just to give the U.S. funds to the state banks, and then the state banks, were issuing their own bank notes up, and then they started getting into speculation and whatnot. So the Second Bank of the United States, they're using bank notes. It's bullshit commercial paper, IOUs, promissory notes. And what the hell did these bank notes even look like? I mean, were they greenback jacks? Did they have pretty green ink? Were they nice, durable cotton, paper? Did they have holograms on them, a watermark, metallurgic paper? So, perhaps. I am, I was thinking one way, but now as I'm explaining my own position, I'm thinking perhaps the Second Bank of America did provide a sound currency. But we know that Nicholas Biddle was corrupt. He was going to fuck over America, so perhaps he was only, were these bank notes fair and equal, and, was he distributing them honestly and doing what he was supposed to do? And, Nicholas Biddle acted in the best interest of the American people. He tried to fuck the, American people over just to prove a point. So I don't think he gives a goddamn fuck about the American people. And so it's, I just find it hard to believe that the Second Bank of the United States actually, it was silver and gold back then. So banknotes, are we using banknotes? How long have they been printing it? How much Continental is dead and gone? We're not using the demand notes. It's not greenback jacks. It's what? I would love to see what it looked like. If they look, like funny money Monopoly paper, but if they look like they had some quality to them, then perhaps, maybe there was a reliable currency. So, okay, then what are the reasons, okay? So, if it's not the Bank of America, if it's Andrew Jackson's correct about this, and, him shutting the Bank of America down didn't contribute to the panic of 1837, then what did cause the 1837 panic? Well, just in, short form, poor banking practices in general. There's no deposit insurance, no FDIC, which insures Americans' deposits up to $100,000. And they didn't have sufficient capital requirements, therefore excess reserves. They call it excess because you got to give 10% of the reserves to the Federal Reserve, and then any reserves that you keep in your bank is considered excess reserves. It's extra reserves. And so they didn't have that to, limit the bank runs, collapse in land bubble, low cotton prices, restrictive lending policies in Britain. All these things are to blame. The causes of the 1837 panic, the land bubble's out of control. There's over speculation on land, especially Western lands, by stupid, greedy, foolish investment bankers thinking that they're just going to make, millions of dollars. State banks maintained unsafe reserve ratios, right? They didn't have sufficient capital requirements. They didn't have probably any excess reserves at all if there's no Federal Reserve at all. So how much money or gold and silver did banks even have to keep? At the time, no deposit insurance. If people lost their money, there was no insurance or anything, any way to get that money back. Oops, it's gone. And also, Andrew Jackson, he was correct that the Bank of America was corrupt and a piece of shit, but he wasn't great at economics. He was about sound, hard, reliable currency, but not paper currency. He believed in silver and gold, and that was it was a silver and gold standard back in the day. It was silver and gold was, that's reliable currency. All else is kind of bullshit. Just silver and gold. So I guess in a way it's conservative. He was like, just playing it safe with the, Specie Circular Act of 1832, which says that all public lands could only be bought and paid for with silver and gold. So 1837, suspension of convertibility for, let's see, international specie flows. So some other reasons, but those are, a handful of reasons of why the 1837 panic had happened. The silver and gold standard, maybe adhering to it too much. Perhaps you could have used the paper money. Perhaps he could have, instituted his own Bank of America, not just, shutting it down and leaving it up to the state banks to carry on the monetary policy, but, creating Andrew Jackson, American Bank. And just in general, no insurance on deposits. They weren't holding excess reserves. Banks were very, irresponsible and had very poor practices. Land speculation, low cotton prices. A lot of loans. We're gonna, we got cotton this year, and they're making shit tons of money off the cotton. Slave traders, slave holders using African, Americans, black folks for free labor. And restrictive lending policies in Britain. So all these things, land bubble, over speculation, irresponsible state banks, irresponsible investment bankers, low cotton prices, and, those are the causes of the 1837 panic. And I'll get into, more in depth about those reasons, coming up. But for now, it's 2:01 p.m., Monday, 4/20/2020. John Masters out of Luvetti, Southern Colorado, USA, North America, Earth. Solar system, Milky Way, galaxy, universe.